Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Kellam, welcoming you to this week's edition of Encounter. I'm serving as the Parish Associate at the Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott. I've had 3 brushes with gun violence personally, and that's terribly troubling for me and for my family. My nephew was shot in the back on a school playground in North Carolina a few decades ago. He's recovered. It was not a serious injury, but it could have been. My brother-in-law was robbed and abducted at gunpoint. And several years ago, back in Virginia, I was also robbed at gunpoint with a sawed-off shotgun pointed at my driver's side window in the order to get out of the car and give up my wallet. Your money or your life. I did not take as much time as Jack Benny did. I immediately conceded my $8. So gun violence is a troubling thing in our country, and keeping track of gun violence is the executive director of the Gun Violence Archive. Our guest today, Mark Bryant. Mark, welcome to Encounter.
Thank you for having me.
I'm kind of nervous because you've been interviewed on network TV and the BBC, and here now you've reached the big time in Binghamton. So, well, let's start off with how this Gun Violence Archive got started, and then we'll talk a little bit about its work, about how gun violence is reported into your headquarters, and the results of that work of gaining objectivity, and people have great respect for the objectivity of the organization. So, where did it get started?
At one point in 2012, I was doing research on gun violence, and I found the one most consistent thing was the inconsistency of numbers. You could look at one set of numbers, and they would reflect one idea. Some people would count everything, whether someone was shot or not. Some extrapolations from small surveys would show just hideously large numbers of like defensive gun uses. And so we started looking at all that and seeing, well, what does it really need? And then I started working with Slate, who after Sandy Hook decided to put out a how many people have been killed by gun violence since Sandy Hook. And they started that. And then after about a year, they were ready to fold it because it was their year program. And we tried to take it from them. We asked for it, and then they said, we have someone else that's interested. And the someone else called me at 11 o'clock one night from Aspen, and we chatted for about an hour and a half. And 5 days later, we were partners and had started the process. And so that was September of 2013.
So this is almost coming up. Well, you're heading toward 10 years since the initial thoughts came to mind, and in that time, you've grown to about 7,500 sources who are reporting in. How does that process work, Mark?
Well, we have 24 researchers, some full-time, some part-time. They are all broken down into different regions. So I have one person, as an example, that does nothing but Chicago and Illinois, and then part of Indiana. And then I have other people that do multiple states, because North Dakota, South Dakota, and all that don't require as much attention. We have a master list of about 7,500 sources, and we touch them every day. We either touch them by having a bot go through them and read their news, or we physically put eyeballs on their websites. This includes a lot of law enforcement, which has really come up in the last in the last 2 years, law enforcement has been on social media with Twitter and Facebook, and are being much more proactive in putting news out.
So the news comes into your central computer, either through personal conversations or the bot, and then you define gun violence, and in various categories. There are accidents. There are I guess certainly murders, but you've also got to break them down into teens and children. When all of this is put together, you've created a very credible organization, because you've maintained, as your website says, you're an advocacy group. You're not an advocacy group. It says the mission of the Gun Violence Archive is to document incidents of gun violence and gun crime nationally, to provide independent, verified data to those who need it in their research, advocacy, writing, and reporting. So the importance of objectivity helps, I think, in making sure that there's no what am I looking for here? There's no sway to one side or the other in terms of the gun, the NRA and the Second Amendment rights and that kind of thing. You're simply reporting facts.
Right. We look at, and everything that we have has a source. So if we don't have a source, we don't include it. So I may hear a rumor of a shooting, in my town or in another town, but if I don't see it, if I don't get a police report for it, it's not in there. I just will not, we don't put anything in that we cannot verify. And that helps with things like the NRA. At first, the NRA did everything they could to attack our credibility, and they they worked on us pretty hard for a while. And what they don't realize is I really thank them for that, because they made us a much better organization. We got tighter on how we did things, and we looked at what constituted a certain definition, and we honed that to make it better. And so we look at now. I know because I made a typo, or one of my people made a typo on one of our defensive gun use incidents, and I spotted it on NRA. So they took it straight from us, typo and all. So I know they use our data too.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the website and what it includes. The website is www.gunviolencearchive.org. And so it's easy to find, and you can also just simply Google Gun Violence Archive. Tell us what we're going to find there, Mark.
You're going to find several things. You're going to find a database of about 1 million incidents over the last 9 years now. You're going to find incidents broken down into subcategories of everything from mass shootings to murder-suicides, accidental shootings, officer-involved shootings, officers shot, officers shooting others. And you're going to find all different ways of breaking it down. Our granularity is probably the thing that we're most proud of, in that we can tell you for the most part, the street, maybe even the address, the age and sex of the victims, and if we have them, of the suspects. And so we're able to take that, and as we geocode it, we can put hot maps on and show every town just where their problems are. Yeah. And that's part of what we do. And that's what we do that CDC and FBI can't do, because among other things, they're not quick enough. They're 18 months behind. But secondly, they don't show the granularity. If I go to CDC and say, how many people were killed, they'll say 12,000. And I will say 12,000. And oh, by the way, here's the addresses and the ages and the sexes of all 12,000 of those people.
Right, right. The trends, as I look at the graph, are troubling. Can you talk a little bit about trends?
Trent, as we started in 2014, we started noticing each year it was just getting worse. And we thought, okay, is this our data collection? Are we getting better at data collection? So it's just reflecting something different. And it turns out no, because, as we look at the CDC numbers that come in 18 months later, our numbers correlate with them very, very well. So we know that we were collecting the data, and what's happening is there's just more and more violence occurring. Now, I will have to say in a very happy fashion that in 2022, we're starting to see a trending down by about 2%. So last year, 2021 appears to be the spike year, and hopefully it is an outlier and not just this is going to be an outlier.
Right, right. Yeah, you don't want one year to be an anomaly and then the trends continue.
Exactly.
Does the pandemic have anything to do with this, do you suppose?
Well, we thought when March of last year came in, or March of 2000 came in, I just made a hard assumption. I said, man, we're going to see our numbers tumble. And they went the opposite direction. They went up. We don't know why. We know that as more and more people were able to go to fewer and fewer places, they seem to interact more and shoot more. Now, we did see an increase in murder-suicides, which are usually domestic incidents and can be stress-related, can be health-related. Murder-suicides are the kind of incident that sometimes it's domestic violence that goes just too far, and other times it's couples at the end of their path, and they have made a decision that they're going to go out together on their own terms. And so sometimes that is a murder-suicide as well. So we make sure that as we're logging those and we see that happen, we're not putting them in a pejorative look. We're realizing that, this is just an end-of-life decision that some people have had to make.
Yeah, yeah. You, your own personal story, you're a gun owner, right?
Yes. Have been for the first 5 or 6 years of Gun Violence Archive. When I got really tired and stressed, I would go to the range and shoot holes in paper. I've been doing that. I pointed out to somebody since the Eisenhower administration. So I was 5 at the time, and you grow up in the mountains of East Kentucky. There's not a lot to do there. There was no cable TV. There was no golf courses. There were all of these things for kids to do with their parents. We went to the garbage dump on top of Pine Mountain and shot rats. So you started that at 5 years old. That becomes a hobby that you end up having, not the rats part, but the shooting part.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I have to say that for all of my nervousness around guns, my grandson loves to go to the shooting range and compete, and it looks like he's headed toward a career, perhaps in law enforcement. So, I know that there are lots of sides to this issue of gun ownership and gun use. We probably want to work toward a little bit of the feeling that what would it take to put you out of business? I know gun violence.
Favorite question.
Yeah. Well, then what's your favorite answer?
I don't have one. Sadly, I can think of several things. My primary, I'm not an advocate of banning. Mm-hmm. I just am not, just on principle, which puts me at odds with a lot of the folks that are in the gun violence prevention sector. But I believe that if we look at reducing the size of gun magazines to where instead of having the ability to hold 15 rounds, 30 rounds, 60 rounds, 100 rounds, maybe cut it down to 5 rounds. That makes it harder for someone to shoot a lot of people. And, we see a lot of these shootings where people load in with a gun that has already, it's got a capacity for 60 without them having to reload. And so if they shoot 60 shots, especially with an AR-15 or an AK-47. If they hit somebody, they've done damage. I mean, that's not just a winging it. I have a friend who was in a mass shooting in Cincinnati. Now, fortunately for her, the shooter used a 9mm pistol, and she took 12 rounds and is still alive.
Wow.
And she's just does extremely. She's now doing advocacy work, and we of course help with that when she needs it. We will, while we are not an advocacy group, we will provide her with the data that she needs. Which just reminded me I've got some to get to her today. So but you know, so one of the things that I would do is I would reduce capacity. I would look also at, we have to change the way we address mental health. If somebody's having a bad day, a bad week, a bad month, maybe we need to hold on to their guns for them in safekeeping, and then have them when they're okay, they can have them back again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Our guest today is Mark Bryant. He is the executive director, and it's fair to say he was the founder of the Gun Violence Archive. Your offices are based in Washington.
Yes.
And why Washington? Why not?
Well, our co-founder has an office in Washington. He is a mover and shaker. When I walk into his office, I might see Hillary. I might see Alan Greenspan. There are several people that I may see if I walk into his office or in his collection of offices. So that's where we are. And our employees, our contractors, are spread out all over the country. And Canada, I have to point out, and Canada. So we have people that are doing research. That's the nice part about the internet, and the way the internet is set up is I can have people in India, in Canada, in California, or here in Lexington, Kentucky, doing the work.
Yeah. Speaking of those other nations, the fact is, though, that the gun violence is certainly more prevalent in our country than it is anywhere else in the world. Is that fair to say?
Oh, without question. You know, now when you enter, when you introduce military violence, like in Rwanda or places like that, then they have numbers that leap, obviously. Even though they're only shooting civilians, they're not shooting at military targets. And you know, so we see some there. I've talked to a couple of people in Europe asking if we should start what we're doing here there, and I honestly don't see the need. We could probably have one person with a notepad on the train covering it throughout all of Europe. They just don't have that many shootings.
Yeah, yeah. When you live with this day after day after day, another of your favorite questions might be, how in the world do you separate yourself from the bad news that comes into you day after day after day? You know, I know pastors are on call 24/7. Some have just come from the emergency room or consoling someone, and when they go home at night, they can't really separate themselves from that. But you have a similar situation with one report after another of someone being killed or injured by gunfire.
I tend to, about 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night, I start reviewing the work of the day, and we'll have about 160 incidents that I need to scan through every day. And some of them, there's no way to separate from it. Now, at the first year, when we first started this, when a child would be shot and killed, I could tell you that child's name, and I could tell you what town it was, and I could give you the history of what had occurred. I can't do that any longer. It's now all more of a blur. I can see the highlights in my head, but after a while, you know, we just start looking at literally looking at trends, you know, and the one that bothers me is the, you know, either children getting shot because their parent did not properly secure their weapon. And so they get it out and play with the gun. They've seen it on television. They've seen dad handle it, and they can do that. And they shoot themselves or shoot someone else. Those bother me a lot. I tend to provide extra focus for making sure that we have all the details very correct on that. And then these murder-suicides where it's either domestic violence or end of life, those are just, and those are of everything else that's going down this year, they are trending up by a fairly significant amount.
And the statistics are the victims of gun violence, but we know that the victims are not simply those who have received the injury or have been killed, but it's families, it's communities, it's like a pebble dropped in the water, and these ripples go. When my nephew was shot, I of course thought of my own children, and when I was held up, I have to admit I don't like walking down any dark street now with two people following me from behind.
I can see that. Yeah.
So this is a problem that we have to address in some way. And you've mentioned the number of shots that a gun can fire all at once, the kinds of weapons that people have access to, and gun safety, keeping guns locked up so that children can't get at them. The Gun Violence Archive is nonprofit, and it is not an advocacy group. Where do you get your funding for all of this?
We have an angel who is in Washington, and he is right now. He's turning 80 this year, so we're looking at transitions now. So our funding probably, if you ask me this question in 2 more years, will be different. But right now we have Michael Klein he has been our angel for since the beginning, and he also started the Sunlight Foundation, so he is very in tune with transparency and open records and everybody being able to see what's going on, whether it's something that maybe it reflects poorly on maybe his own personal political views or enhances his personal political views. But he's very, very good at he's a hands-off. He's a hands-off guy. He lets me run this thing like he's seen us go from one interview we did in 2013, which when I look back at it is really funny to read. And then I look at, we were in CNN and BBC and Nightline in the last month. And so we see just how much we've grown. I have a tendency every once in a while to type in according to the Gun Violence Archive in Google and just see how many hits it is. And it's just a staggering number of hits. So we've done good work. It's not me. I've got 20 people that make me look good. My job is just to look pretty on television. We will let them do all the work, and we manage it and keep it going.
I try to look really pretty on radio, so my
job, there you go.
a lot easier. When you were growing up, you didn't decide, I think I'm going to be the executive director of the Gun Violence Archive. What were your vocational plans and background?
I started out in radio. In high school, I worked at a 5,000 watt radio station in Harlan. I also worked at a 5,000 watt station in California and a couple of 1,000 watters in other parts of Kentucky. And then when I found out how much they didn't pay, I decided that I needed to find another avocation. And I did systems work, but I also did photography. I owned the Kentucky Postcard Company for 15 years and did all the scenic postcards in Kentucky for all the state parks and all the lodges and hotels and all of that. And then moved to technology. And it started out as a bad joke. Microsoft sent a note out asking, how do you use Microsoft Works? And I was in a particularly tongue-in-cheek feeling that night, and I wrote this just really smartly sarcastic note back to them. And the next thing I know, one of their PR people goes, "Hey, would you like to come to Washington to be one of the 3 people that represent Microsoft Works?" And that started the technology part of this thing, and then IBM, and then theoretical retirement, and then this came up. So.
Also happen to know that you enjoyed restoring classic Mercedes-Benz automobiles.
I did, yes. Yep. And one caught fire last year, and that sort of cut into my time for doing that. I had worked on that car. That was going to be my last. That was going to be my daily driver forever. And it was a '91 Mercedes, and a very nice looking car. And I'm sitting in my office and I hear beeping sounds, and it's the alarm going off, and there's smoke and fire billowing out of the car. A switch had softened and shorted out. It happens.
Yeah, right. Well, we're getting toward the end of our time. I want to go back and say, kind of summarize, as a result of the Gun Violence Archive's work, what do you hope to accomplish?
We want the conversation to be consistent. So whether Joe Biden says, according to the Gun Violence Archive, or whether, as we were a couple of months ago, we were in a Supreme Court decision. So when we're getting quoted in that, and they're looking at our data and the legitimacy of our data, what we're looking at is people are looking at hard numbers. So when they are advocating, or when politicians are discussing it, they're looking at factual information. They're not looking at hyperbole, and that is what we want to see. We want to see the conversation to where, whether it's the NRA or Everytown, they are using the same information because it is legitimate, and it allows the conversation to go past numbers and then go to the actual subject.
Right. Once again, the website for the Gun Violence Archive is www.gunviolencearchive.org. And there you'll find the statistics that are right up to date, right up to the day. And then you'll see the trends, too, for gun violence, and begin to draw your own conclusions about the issue of gun violence in our country. Our guest today has been Mark Bryant, the Executive Director of the Gun Violence Archive. Mark, it's good to see you and see the Santa Claus image is still alive. Well,
it's not gone away.
Yeah. So thank you again for your work and for being with us today on Encounter.
Well, thank you for having me.
Is produced in cooperation with the Broome County Council of Churches, and our thanks to WBNG TV for the production facilities, and for WMBF for airing the audio track. I'm Jeff Kellam, hoping that in the coming week you'll be gentle with people and with yourself.